As a teenager, she'd say things like, now, I'd like to host a party on Wednesday night, and we'd say no. And then she'd say, right, let's work through your concerns about this party so that we can process your anxieties.
Mental health issues covers an entire gamut, and we can't go through all of them in this interview, of course.
Yeah.
But what do you think is the biggest one that teens face today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that 1 in 3 teenagers with very high levels of distress is, the biggest issue, because not every teenager who's struggling is going to sort of meet criteria to have an anxiety disorder or clinical depression and things like that. But there's this very high level of distress where young people are feeling very big, intense emotions and are really struggling with that. And in my book, I've put together something called the Big Feelings Band-Aids, which is a whole list of strategies that young people and parents can do when the distress levels go up. So ways to press pause, to sort of distract or comfort themselves, to hopefully allow those really intense feelings to pass so that they don't do anything that would be harmful to themselves, and kind of add fuel to the fire and make the situation worse. And that's something that when people are referred to mental health services, they tend to learn those skills. And so what I've tried to do is put into the book the sort of things that if you saw a psychologist or a counsellor would be the first things that would be done in terms of, the 4 basics of brain care in terms of sleep and nutrition and movement and limiting substances as a real kind of baseline, that if those sort of things aren't looked at, then all of the kind of more specific things are unlikely to work, because, if a kid's kind of only getting 5 hours sleep a night, then the wheels are going to fall off regardless of how many counsellors they talk to or what medication they're given. So, it's looking at those sort of basics that are really important for everybody's mental well-being, and making sure that those things are kind of going okay as a starting point.
How do you tell the difference as a parent that they're just going through what a teenager normally goes through versus they have a mental health issue?
Yeah, that's really difficult, because it's very common for teenagers to change a bit during adolescence. But generally, if there's been a really big change in like a parent's behaviour, attitude, it's about parents being curious about, I wonder what's going on for them. If they suddenly kind of dye their hair black and wear goth clothes and they weren't like that yesterday, something's kind of happened. Or if they were a kid that kind of worked hard at school and was really keen on sport and was really social, and then suddenly their functioning has dropped and they go, football sucks and all my friends are pathetic and school's dumb. It's rather than just going, oh, they're just going through a phase, it's like, that's a really big change in my kids' functioning and their attitude to these things. I wonder what's going on with their mental health. So it's being curious. And obviously, if there's any, people would love me if I was dead, or I'm just a burden on everybody, or, any of those thoughts about death or self-harm, to kind of immediately reach out for mental health support, and there's, even though it's difficult to access mental health services, if you kind of call up a mental health service and say, hey, my kid's mentioning this, can you give me some advice? Do I need to bring my kid for an assessment today? How do I monitor things? So, rather than going, oh, don't be silly, your life's fine, don't think like that, to kind of go, okay, you're thinking like that, that's a massive red flag. We need to do something about that to kind of make sure you've got the support you need to stay safe. So, I think if in doubt, reach out for some advice. It's much better to overreact to something that's nothing by getting some advice, or taking your kid to go and see the GP, than to miss a teenager who's depressed and not wanting to be here, so and I think that was something that I missed as a parent, because of low mood and kind of distress presenting as irritable and angry. It's very easy if a kid is kind of sad and miserable and hopeless to kind of go, I think you're depressed. But if a kid's just suddenly kind of treating you like you're the most annoying person on the planet and everything sucks, and it's easy to miss that kids are actually struggling with their mental health when they're like that. So I think those are the sort of most important sort of things to look at. So big change in your kid's appearance, behavior, attitude, and a drop in functioning. If your kid's kind of grumpy and kind of impossible with you, but they're kind of going out with their friends and they're still really keen on their sport and still doing well at school, then chances are they're probably okay, and that it's more just that natural process of teenagers finding their parents annoying and embarrassing and kind of trying to sort of separate out, because evolution wise we're often designed to sort of young people kind of leave the nest and go and breed somewhere else. So young people do tend to become a bit more argumentative and challenging as a normal developmental phase. But yeah, I mean, even with mental health professionals, we often need to sort of meet with a young person over a period of time to really work out, what's kind of just them going through adolescence and what is actually a mental health difficulty going on. So it's not surprising parents find that difficult, but yeah, big changes and drop in functioning are sort of some of the big red flags that there's more to it than just a phase.
We're going to change tack a little now because we polled our audience on social media about the kind of topics that they wanted to hear about between teens. On Instagram, it was overwhelmingly on how to strengthen your relationship with your teens.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it a little earlier about how there is the normal teenage phase in which they kind of want to stop talking to you, but they're still hanging out with your friends and they're leaving the nest, etc. Because, they tend to turn to their friends more. But how do you get your children to still communicate with you, because you still want to be there for them, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think certainly from my experience, both parenting teens and talking with teens who I see as a psychiatrist, is that sometimes you need sort of a different way of approaching things. Certainly with my kids, talking in the car was often a great way to communicate, because there's not that intense eye contact. And so sometimes more uncomfortable subjects can be talked about when you're not looking at each other. Although I remember when my son was 15, he'd say when I picked him up from school, I was allowed one question and then one follow-up question, and anything more was annoying. So I'd spend the whole time like driving there going, okay, what's going to be my open-ended question? Because if you say, how was school, we just go, fine. And that would be the end of it. And then the follow-up question would be like, kind of, what did you do? Nothing. And you go, oh no, I got like one-word answers to my two questions. And now so what I actually found was that it was better to just go, hi. And then, a little bit later, if nothing happens, I'd just go, oh yeah, today I took dog to the vet and and just kind of mention something about what happened in my day, and then silence, and then quite often you go, oh yeah, and like in maths the teacher was so annoying, or so sometimes not firing questions, but just volunteering a kind of, I'm just saying something about my day, and then maybe you say something about your day. Also, my son and daughter used to love playing cards and board games with my husband. He'd always devote several hours every weekend to that, and doing that activity together, where you were sort of doing something else, was often a time that they'd share things with him. And in the heat of the moment particularly, sometimes young people are more likely to share information via text or messenger with you rather than face to face. So certainly with my daughter, quite often she'd kind of let me know what she was upset about via text text rather than talking to me. And psychologist Nigel Latter from New Zealand's got a great expression called be the rock, not the ocean. And so I'd quite often think about that if I was kind of going, oh, my daughter or son seems upset today. Am I going to go and knock on their door? Am I going to text them? Am I going to kind of flap around? And then I go, no, I'm being the ocean. I need to be the rock. I need to just sort of calm myself and center myself and let them know that I'm here if they want to talk about things, but not sort of chasing them around. So that sort of was something that was helpful. And I had an interview for a magazine with a woman who said that by her third child, she worked out that if she planted herself in the kitchen with a cup of tea after school, because her kids walked home, and was just present in the kitchen like a rock, rather than being busy kind of making dinner and working and things, that her kids would quite often let her know about their day and talk to her if she was just there and present like a rock in the kitchen. So I think that can be really helpful to sort of think of your role like that. And in the book, I talk about the relationship that we have with our young people being like a garage, and the teenager being like an electric car that comes into the garage and recharges and then goes out into the world again. And certainly when my young adult kids were sort of coming and going from the house, I was thinking, okay, this relationship is the garage, they're recharging, they're going back out into the world, and that's my role at the moment, is to provide that secure base garage where they can come to and then go out again. And so that was helpful to me. I think just leave the garage door open so that they can come and go as they please, rather than going, oh, I'm not getting enough attention from them, and why are they not doing this? And just think, no, they're at the stage now where they're coming and going, but isn't it wonderful that our relationship is a place they can come back to recharge, that they touch base and then they head out again, and that the family home is like a safe haven for them to be able to do that. So I think a lot of it's sort of reframing what's happening in the relationship, rather than kind of going, oh, we're not close like we used to, and it's awful, and I'm losing them, and to actually go, no, this is what's supposed to be happening. They're coming and going, they're recharging, they're going back out in the world, and that's our role as a parent, is to support that, so to be there when they need recharging, but not like chasing them around and sort of ram-raiding them back into the garage. Because
I like that.
Yeah. So that I think that analogy really kind of helped me to kind of see the role. I'm a recharging station. And the kids don't need to be plugged into the garage 24/7 anymore. They're out there in the world doing their independent young people stuff, and that's wonderful, because that's where they're up to in their kind of transition to adulthood.
I really like that, because I know I have a tendency to chase around. I mean,
Yeah.
my son's only 7 now, so, probably still chaseable. But yeah,
Yeah.
I can see myself being the one going, let's talk, let's have a talk.
Yeah, we need to have our connection time where we have conversation, and they go, yeah. And I think very much like that kind of dance that we have with babies, where it's kind of like they make eye contact, so you smile and coo, and then they look away, and so you give them a break. And it's very similar with teenagers. And I think quite often we don't really observe teenagers enough to know when they might want to sort of come into the garage and connect. Sometimes it's just a little shift of emotion or a little passing comment. My son's going off on an exchange to an American university next year, and he just kind of made a little passing comment of, maybe you could come and visit at some time. And it would have been quite easy to miss that, but that was him kind of, not wanting to be uncool, but just wanting to kind of reach out to say, hey, it'd be kind of great if the recharging garage came to me kind of maybe a few weeks after I've been there, so I've got a chance to kind of give the settling in myself a go and problem solve things. But if anything's kind of not working out, it'd be great to have that support. And so it's that kind of noticing those little requests to come into the garage, because often teenagers aren't sort of obvious like that. But so it's looking out, and also sometimes if your teenager isn't particularly communicative and they start talking about something, then it often needs to be a drop everything moment. So if you're in the middle of cooking dinner, kind of dinner can wait. Or if you've got something that you're supposed to do with work and they kind of go, actually things aren't going so well at school, you go, okay, work can wait. I need to be here for you. And I also like the idea of drop and run comments, where you just sort of sow a seed of an idea with like a little important message, and then you leave before there's any chance that they can tell you that you're wrong. Like my son had a whole lot of football injuries, sort of pulled muscles, and yeah, he's always been quite dismissive of physiotherapy and rehab plans. It's like, I know how to recover and da-da-da. And so I just said to him, wonder what would happen if you strengthened your legs. And then I just walked away. And then next minute he kind of tells me, oh yeah, and I've joined the gym and I'm strengthening my legs. And I'd done all these kind of long TED talks about the benefits of physiotherapy and why you need someone to kind of monitor your rehab and all that kind of thing. But yeah, it was just that one little sowing a seed without going on and on about it that actually kind of made that change, or allowed him to take on board that information and go, oh, that's not a bad idea actually. So yeah, so I think those different ways of communicating and just reframing your relationship, and it's a progressive thing, because obviously at 7 the kind of teenage electric car is plugged into the garage a lot more than they are at 17. So and acknowledging that it can be hard for parents to let go a bit and allow our kids that space to become young adults, rather than kind of keeping that helicopter parenting going, where you're kind of sending down the rescue ropes every 5 minutes and checking in. And because there is quite a lot of evidence that sort of over-involved helicopter parenting does actually increase the chance that your kid's going to struggle with anxiety and depression and have less self-confidence that they can manage things themselves. So I call the opposite of that benign neglect, where you kind of intentionally step back and give your kids a bit more space to kind of problem solve and, possibly fail and possibly set off the smoke alarms in the kitchen or flood the laundry, but if you give them the chance to kind of do their own laundry, or to kind of put together a meal without hovering and kind of telling them all the disasters that can happen, it does give them the confidence that, hey, I'm actually a competent person. Sure, I kind of burnt dinner, but otherwise it was okay, and sort of next time I'll know to kind of look at how long it should be in the oven. And so it's sort of stepping back and giving kids space, so that you're sort of doing things kind of with them and making decisions with them rather than for them, and being kind of really, really involved in every step of things. So yeah, so I think I might have invented the phrase benign neglect, but I think it's quite a useful kind of opposite of helicopter, in terms of leaving the helicopter on the helipad and stepping back.
I like that. You talk about, I want to go back to, the fact that you say that we will need to become that rock. We need to become that garage, that safe place for them, and that we wait for them to come to us. How do we communicate to the teens to let them realize that at the end of the day, they can come and connect with us still, that we are the garage?
Yeah, I think often in my experience, you don't need to actually kind of have a conversation particularly about that, but it's more what you actually do. So if, for example, you're sitting having a cup of tea in the kitchen and you are clearly available and you're not busy and stressed and you're just there, then they kind of go, Mum seems like she's there if I want to say something to her, because she's kind of looks like she'll pay attention to me, so it's often more what you do. I mean, obviously, if you've noticed something you're worried about with your teenager, like you might say, hey, I've noticed that you are kind of up wandering around the house at 2 o'clock in the morning. I've noticed that it seems to be hard for you to get the amount of sleep that you need. I'd like to be able to help. Let me know what I can do, so you kind of sow that seed without going, it's so important to sleep, you need to get to bed earlier, what are you doing up that late? It's very easy to kind of flap around and be the ocean, not the rock in that situation, rather than just going, I've noticed and I care and I'm here. So in those kind of situations, just letting them know that you've noticed and care and that you are available to talk about things. But I think most of the time it's about actually doing what you say you're going to do. So if you are kind of, I'm going to be there for you, but you're always whirling around very stressed and overwhelmed with the amount of work you've got to do and clearly aren't really available to your kids, then kids are going to go, oh, well, she says that we can talk anytime, but she's so stressed it's not going to go well, and so they don't talk to you. So it's about kind of living that and behaving in that way, and working out, is sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea after school the way that I can really demonstrate that I'm here and available, and that they can talk to me, and doing it on their terms. So when they want to talk to you, as opposed to, I've got some free time at the moment, I'd now like to interrogate you about everything in your life so that we can have our connecting time. And they go, really not in the mood, Mum, no.
Wow. Personally, I think that's really helpful because, the type of person that I am, it's, you want to just fill your day up. You're busy, right? And so you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing everything. And so you don't end up having the time to be able to sit and be available.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I was going to say, and I think that experience is kind of the experience of probably the majority of parents these days, of very busy lives with lots happening and a lot of pressure. And even if we don't have to be stressed and rushing around, we tend to fill our days with kind of a whole lot of projects, and I think that's one of the reasons why in the car often works, because especially if you've got a longish drive, you're both there, you're both motionless, you can't be doing too much multitasking. So it's thinking of that as an opportunity if you've got a very busy life to go, okay. And I did really notice a huge difference with my son when he got his driver's license at 16 and was driving himself to school and things. It was like, that golden. So now whenever I need to go to the airport, I go, hey, Angus, any chance you can give me a ride to the airport? And I know that's a 45-minute drive, and we do it as a kind of paid job, that instead of paying an Uber, I pay him. Then I know, yay, we've got 45 minutes where we can just kind of catch up. So sometimes it's just trying to make those times available.
Well, it's also a good reminder, like at the same time, we could potentially in our own lives schedule where we have some free time for ourselves, which is actually good self-care as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And
but
then,
I think it's also remembering, you might go, Tuesday between 4 and 5, I'm going to be available for my kids, and that might not be the time that they want to talk to you. So
accept that.
and accept that. But very, very much sort of allowing a bit more kind of sitting and quiet and available, and some times where you're just being rather than doing is one of the big challenges in our lives, but super important when you're a parent to have more being time.
You've just graduated from parenting teens. You're a psychiatrist.
Mm.
Did you think it's easier because of what you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started off quite well, because I had just done a 2-year postgraduate diploma in infant mental health when I was pregnant with my daughter. And so I think I really got a solid A+ in kind of 0 to 12 months. Also had a very easy baby, so I was kind of feeling pretty smug about parenting, kind of going, oh yeah, I think I've nailed it. We've got this lovely dance of communication, baby's settled and happy, nothing to it. And then my son arrived, and I realized that we had just got lucky the first time, and that it was nothing to do with parenting skill or my incredible knowledge. Yeah, he sort of came out kind of like this little meerkat, and kind of would only sleep for 20 minutes at a time. And my daughter would just kind of sit on a mat and babble to herself, and my son was literally running at 9 months, and we had to have a foam crash helmet for him because we had solid floors everywhere, and he was climbing out of cots and flipping over those vibrating bouncinettes. And yeah, so realized that parenting comes down a lot to individual aspects of children, and they all come out differently. And yeah, I got a very, very, very vivid memory when my kids were preschoolers. We played a game called Name the Emotion. And so I'd do different faces like angry. They go angry, and then I go, and they go surprised. And so we had this game about naming emotions. And I can remember my daughter at 4 saying, I am frustrated and overwhelmed, and I need to watch a DVD to calm myself down, you know. And I thought, oh dear, I think we've really overdone the emotional intelligence. And then, yeah, then as a teenager, she'd say things like, now, I'd like to host a party on Wednesday night. And we'd say no. And then she'd say, right, let's work through your concerns about this party so that we can process your anxieties. Going like, oh no, we've created a monster.
He's using your language back at you.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, so that was, yeah, it was always kind of quite a challenge parenting a child who was so emotionally intelligent and verbally able that basically she could persuade us of almost anything. So but yeah, I do remember her saying as a teenager, when we were having sort of rockier patches, you know, I'm not one of your patients, don't psychoanalyze and diagnose me. That was sort of particularly when I was saying, hey, you know, I think you've got ADHD. I'm seeing a lot of the symptoms that I see in sort of people who come along to me with ADHD. And she goes, I do not. And now as a young adult, she's going, I definitely have ADHD, and embracing it. But I suspect because I was a psychiatrist, it was harder for her to be able to kind of hear that, because she felt like she was being diagnosed and analysed, rather than a mum just going, hey, I'm really worried that you haven't handed a single assessment in the whole of high school on time, and you're never able to be on time. There's sort of quite a lot of things going on that are concerning. But yeah, I got a lot of pushback, which I think was probably being a psychiatrist. I think also when you know what you would ideally be doing, and if you're not doing it, then you probably have more guilt than if you're just kind of fumbling around in the dark, you know, and knowing that you need to kind of calm yourself, so kind of calm the farm and chill out before you have any connection with your kids. And then if you kind of launch into a great kind of monologue with high emotions about something and think you can persuade your teenagers just by doing a TED talk at them, and then afterwards go, oh, did that all completely in an unhelpful way. So I think it's definitely got pros and cons. I mean, I've certainly have a lot of awareness about, you know, teenage development, but it's interesting though, when you're in the thick of it yourself, and it's at an emotional level, it's a lot harder, even if you have the theoretical knowledge. You know, for example, both of my kids sort of went through a rough patch, sort of 15, 16, where they were both really irritable and really oppositional, and just, you know, everything was really difficult. And both of them have told me that they were really struggling emotionally through that period with various things. But I think as parents, we kind of went, oh, they're just being irritable, impossible teenagers, and sort of were more likely to get angry with them rather than going, you know, are you okay? So that's probably one of my biggest learnings looking back, and as I write the book, sort of really reflecting on my parenting, going, I think I, you know, especially around that time, put things down to a developmental phase rather than going, my kids who used to be quite lovely are now really impossible. There's kind of been this really big change in them. What's going on? Are they okay? And another thing that probably was challenging was, I talk a lot about parents kind of calming themselves, then really listening to their kids, and then validating their emotions before you get into any kind of logical conversation about problem solving and things. Whereas I've found, and I think I'm very good at validating my friends and the people who come to see me as a psychiatrist. But when you're in the thick of it, I think with your kids, especially if they're accusing you of wrongdoings that you think is really unjust, it's very hard to do the listen and validate, because I automatically got into defensive. That's not true. I didn't do that, as opposed to go, it sounds like you're really upset about this. An example would be my son got really angry because I'd emailed his high school sort of teacher to say that we supported him leaving early on a Wednesday because he was coaching a football team and needed to get there on time. And he lost the plot about that because we had meddled and he had it under control, and now we were putting the teacher under pressure. And, so he did this big kind of angry rant at me. And I just got immediately defensive rather than go, oh, okay, you're really upset about this. It's made you really angry. Let me listen, and, we can talk about it. So I think I missed that kind of validating step. I just heard you did the wrong thing, and I was kind of immediately in the, well, I was just trying to help, and, the teacher wasn't going to let you do it without parental permission, and, immediately got into that defensive. So I think those are sort of my big learnings as I kind of reflect back on my parenting, and also that kind of mixed thing that even when you're a psychiatrist who has all the theoretical knowledge, it doesn't mean you can always put it into action in the heat of the moment, when you're in an emotional state yourself.
To a certain extent, I actually really appreciate that level of authenticity, because with what I do, like, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I've read the books, I've done the interviews, and I know the tools, and I know what I have to do. And yet oftentimes I find myself in the thick of it, not doing what I ought to do. And then reflecting back and going, oh no, I stuffed it up again. And just the amount of guilt that I feel.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that sort of often feeling like you've got to be a fairly kind of perfect sort of parent is a pressure we put ourselves under. And I think part of what we model to our kids is that we don't beat ourselves up about things that have gone wrong. You've probably heard of the concept of rupture and repair, and that was certainly very helpful for me through those kind of rough patches. I'd go, kind of big argument, door slams, kind of worst parent in the world moment. Okay, so this is a rupture, and the next step is to repair it. And that's a really important thing to model to your kids, to go, hey, I think I kind of lost the plot there. That was kind of a bit unfair. I'm sorry for yelling, or I'm sorry for kind of getting defensive. Let's kind of sit down and talk about it some more, or even just an apology if emotions are still high and it's not the right time to kind of talk. So, and I think also a real thing that I emphasize lots in the book is about that the first step in every situation is parents calming themselves and finding ways to calm themselves and caring for themselves so they can calm themselves, as being, the most important thing you can do as a parent. Because if you're stressed out and anxious and dysregulated, you're just going to fly off the handle or have a really anxious response to things. And so if you can kind of really calm yourself and find what works to calm yourself, and knowing that that's the first step. So if your kid comes home and goes blah, and you go, oh, I'm really stressed, I'm not going to be able to cope with this, you go, let's talk about that in a few minutes, and kind of go outside, do some breathing, go pat the dog, have a shower, whatever it takes to get yourself into that sort of calmer state. Because, you know, if we think about when we had kids were little, you know, if they were sort of crying and screaming, we'd pick them up and soothe them. But if we were kind of stressed out and exhausted ourselves, we often couldn't soothe them. But kind of grandmother could, or partner could, or stranger in the supermarket could, because they were calm and chilled out. And it's very much the same with our teenagers, that if they're all worked up and upset about something, if we are also all worked up and upset, then, you know, we're going to both be dysregulated, and it's going to be very hard to have any sort of positive connection or relationship in that situation.
Yeah, it's heartening to know that, you know, I've always imagined, like, you know, the household of teenagers with parents who are psychiatrists would be forever calm and just peaceful. But it's encouraging to know, you know, we're all human, and that things
absolutely.
do.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we have to be realistic that we're all human. We're all going to make sort of we're going to have times where things are not ideal and don't go the way that we would like them to go, but it's about kind of go, okay, that's just how it is, rupture and repair, go and repair it, calm myself, regroup, start again, you know. And also thinking that the relationship that you have with your kids is like a template for other relationships. So if it's sort of artificially perfect because parents are like so good at parenting, then they go out in the real world and it's like, whoa, why are teachers mean to me? Whoa, why is my friend not invited me to a party? Why is my boyfriend kind of angry with me? You know, so it's not ideal for kids to have absolutely perfect parents anyway. You know, having real parents who experience real emotions, and you go, I was really angry and stressed and lost the plot and started yelling, kind of, I'm going to go for a walk to kind of calm down and get myself into a better headspace. You know, that models to them how to cope with emotions, and that, you know, don't beat yourself up if you lose the plot, but apologize, get yourself calm. You know, so having real emotions helps you to be a askable and tellable parent, you know, because if you just look like you completely got it together and the teenager's struggling with something, they'll go, won't mention that to mum because she won't understand about anxiety or stress or feeling angry or feeling sad because she's perfect. Whereas if you can kind of be real with your kids and have conversations about dealing with difficult emotions, then it does make it easier for teenagers to see you as somebody who they can ask things or tell things.
Oh, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your insights.
Yeah, well, it's been lovely to chat to you. Hopefully some useful things to help parents, or some different ideas.